everybody. I'm Julia diLiberti. I'm a professor of humanities at College of DuPage, and I'm also the global education liaison. And today I'm with Tauya Forst, who is a JD, has her JD, and is a professor of justice studies at the College of DuPage. And I'm with Dennis Emano, who is a mental health counselor at the College of DuPage as well. And I want you guys to say a little bit about your experience at the college, and then I want to say that Dennis and Tauya were very much involved in helping to organize a demonstration, a rally at College of DuPage, and I want to talk a little bit more about that rally. So I'm going to turn it over to Tauya first to say a little bit about yourself and about your involvement in the rally, and then Dennis, if you would just follow up with Tauya, that would be great.
Sure.
Thank you, Julia. Actually, I've been at College of DuPage, I guess almost 11 years. I was here first as an adjunct professor, and now am an associate professor. I love what I do, love. Quick story about our actual department, Justice Studies. We had this conversation about 2 years ago, and we saw the landscape of the world changing. So about 1.5 years ago, we started to implement what we thought would better reflect what the system is. And so I'm so grateful that we saw that before all of these things start happening. So that's why we're Justice Studies. We want to make sure that people know that we're not just about law enforcement, that we are a full breadth program.
You used to be criminal justice, and now
we
you're
used
Justice
to be
Studies.
Criminal justice.
That's an important shift too. I think that changes the focus of
Yeah, and for me, that change sort of started as I started to delve into restorative justice, which is what I am now as a practitioner. It kind of brought together all of my loves: education, how I felt that the justice system was unfair in a lot of ways, and a way to really provide a platform for the person who was harmed, or who we call the victim. And so I think restorative justice speaks a lot to this. I know we'll get into that later. The way that we actually came about
Tauya,
this particular...
Before you start that, let me have Dennis talk a little bit about his experience, and then because you guys then can just sort of back and forth about the rally together.
Excellent.
Oh, sure.
Dennis.
So I work as a counselor at COD, primarily focusing on mental health issues because of my background in mental health and clinical work. And I have many interests, but one of them has to do with issues around diversity, social justice, and things like that. I think at the college, I'm probably more known for focusing on mental health, but there's this other side of my work that I've been doing for a very long time, actually, and did focus on in graduate school as well, and that has to do with diversity, social justice issues.
I think you're also noted for your meditation sessions, Dennis.
Oh yes, forgot about that. That's it.
So you guys both have this justice going, this sort of affinity. I think we all do, but I mean, you guys are very proactive in creating justice and working towards justice. And so after George Floyd's death, you created an event, like a rally for the students and for the community. Can you guys talk about your involvement in that and about what this rally meant to you?
Yeah, so Dennis, actually, I always say that this was his baby. He knows that. He came to me, and we are involved in another committee together, and he sort of expressed his heart. And I heard his heart saying that we needed to do something. Like, we hadn't really figured out what the something was, but we needed our community to recognize what was happening. I call it there's a physical pandemic, and there's also a racial justice pandemic really bubbling out there. It definitely culminated with George Floyd, but it did not start with him. So as Dennis is saying, I think, kind of navigating those spaces prior to this, it's just that one moment where all the things align. You're able to do it. You have the time, you have the brain power, and now it's a movement. And that's really what 846 is. It's a movement. our students have taken it up and they're doing all kind of activities as well. But for us, the faculty, I think our students were a little nervous about launching something like this on campus. And so Dennis and I are elders, I guess, to the students. And we decided we would just forge ahead and help show the students that they can be supported in their own space, which is College of DuPage.
Right. Oh, great. Dennis, when you went to Tauya, did you guys know what you were was this rally, what you were envisioning, or did you think that would evolve?
I think initially from the beginning, I was thinking protest. I want to, my mind was kind of all over the place, I'll be honest, because I was just kind of very emotional in that moment. And I think there was a sense of, I wasn't connected to anyone. And Tauya was one of the first few people that I thought about. And that's based on what I know about her and what she's talked about in the past, in our conversations together, and also college-wide, and what she stands for. So she was one of the first few people that I actually connected with. And I asked, what do you think about this? And, what do you think we should do? And in my mind, I always thought, we should, if you and I are together on this and there's other people that are together with us, then I think we should do a protest. And then the conversation started to develop from there. We got connected with David Swope and other folks. And
David Swope is our diversity, Office of Diversity at the college. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. So it just grew from there.
Before we were talking, I had referred to this as a rally, and Dennis, you just said protest. And Tauya, you have a different word for this. Can you guys talk about, and so Tauya, I'm a slow learner because you sort of gave me some information before and I still call it a rally, but can you talk to us about the different words you guys are using to talk about this?
Well, I think the most important piece is that most people envision something different when they connect a word, right? So if I use the word rally or protest, sometimes people that we're trying to get to partner or to kind of understand, to expand and connect with, this gives them hesitation to join. So the word that I think we sort of soft landed on was demonstration. And I have to say, even when we landed on the word, Dennis, I don't think we really envisioned what we were actually doing. So this is where I think George Floyd's death really comes in as an inspiration. It was the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that he was really fighting for his life, and they watched life literally leave him, that we decided to highlight, and then to highlight others who may have received a similar death just for, for example, the police being called. I have to explain well-being check because my sister thought that it was a physical check. So I'm just going to take a minute here. A well-being check is where you call police officers because you have some suspicion of someone may be in danger. And we now know that 12 people have lost their lives just in 1 year from the police officers being called on a well-being check. So we just chose to highlight those persons who you don't hear their names in the news, right? So I think that was the demonstration of it all. It's also a protest in that we're saying we do not agree with this type of policing. It's not that we don't agree with policing at all. It's just this type of policing. And I'll let Dennis kind of fill in that area. But I have a lot of thoughts on policing. And I should say, I love officers. I love law enforcement. I want to make sure that's known. This isn't a bash against them. I have friends and family who are involved, but we have to get it right. We have to.
That's right.
Right.
And I would agree with Tauya there. Yeah, I'm not anti-police either. And for me, it was always a protest. And in a lot of ways, it still is a protest. but that's just for me personally and my relation to how how I saw the video on George Floyd and other events, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and then Rayshard Brooks, and et cetera. We could go down the list. For me, personally, it was more of I still use the word awakening, because in some ways I felt like I was asleep. And I practice mindfulness, and mindfulness is about being aware of what's happening in the moment. And the reason why I practice mindfulness is because I'm not very mindful. I'll be honest, I'm not very mindful. Mindfulness practice for me just helps me to be more mindful. Not all the time, but it helps me to be more mindful. And I think for me, when I finally saw that video on George Floyd, it hit me like a ton of bricks at the emotional level, and I'm gonna start crying again.
That's okay, Dennis. We're there with you. We're right there with you.
Yeah.
So it kind of hit me the same way that it's hitting me now. Whenever I talk about it, I get really emotional. So because it's not just George Floyd, like the image itself is very, it's a terrible scene because it's humanity against humanity, right? And for me, as I practice mindfulness and compassion, I become more aware of our shared humanity. That George Floyd is us. I'm George Floyd. George Floyd is me. George Floyd is a loved one, a family member. And for the and even the police, right? I could extend that to the police, the police officer that did that. So, but it's not limited, it's not restricted to that. It is the history of African Americans in this country. It just seemed to me that it all culminated in George Floyd. And for the first time, for the first time in a long time, even though I've been doing this work for a long time, I've been, protesting against, racial injustice and social injustice for a very long time. But there have been moments when I've been sort of, I get distracted with work and, helping students and things like that. But this time it felt like it was a culmination of everything. The history of African Americans in this country, the history of racial injustice, just kind of hit me at the emotional level. And then that was me in that moment. And I thought, I got to do something. I can't just sit here. I can't just sit here and allow myself to just, be aware that this is going on. There's a point where my awareness of my mental state needs to go beyond just awareness and take some action. So the first thing that I think that's where I connected with Tauya, and we had the demonstration.
So you guys, I first I want to respond to lots of things. So you both affirm that you're pro-police, and I think yes. I mean, I don't think anyone is anti. So I think I find it interesting and sad that we can't hold both thoughts in our head, right? I am not pro-murder, right? But I am pro-police, right? And I can be pro-police people who the police are policing as well. So I'm glad you established that. I'm also sad that we feel that we are in a situation where people feel they're picking sides. We're not picking sides, right? We want justice. And Dennis, thank you for sharing your emotions with us, because I think we're all still feeling that way. I get frustrated by the question, what was it about George Floyd? And people are like, well, I think it was the overlay of COVID. And Dennis, I think you just answered that very well. This was a culmination of history, but I also think that I think when you literally watch one person taking away another person's life in the guise of law enforcement with hands in its pockets, you can no longer deny that it is happening. And I think we were all everybody was doing a whole lot. You have to, right? If we knew where our cell phones were made, we couldn't use them. But it's different when you're watching. It's just different when you see it. But I do want to talk about this idea that I don't think you're the only one who felt that way. And we know that there were You introduced us, before we started recording, you were talking about a man named Alex Smith, right? Do you want to tell us a little bit about who he was? And then Tauya, one of the things I asked you guys about was impact. So if you want to talk about the impact of George Floyd, you talked about it on you personally, Dennis. Can we go larger than that? It does a sort of demonstration do anything, and does it go beyond a personal impact? So I'm going to share my screen. You want to talk about the beyond personal impact, and then Dennis, let me know when you want me to share my screen here.
Yeah, so yeah, I love the question about impact, because we're not always able to see what kind of impact our actions have, I think. And sometimes we don't always get the kind of impact that we want, right? And I hear that. I hear that from African Americans all the time, and people of color in general all the time, that, you know, change has not taken place, right? But I'm an optimist. I believe that change takes place. We don't always notice it, but I believe it does happen. Sometimes it's very small, and so going back to what kind of an impact this happens, we did our demonstration, and then a few weeks later, I'm listening to NPR, and I'm hearing about this guy named Alex Smith, who's a GIS expert, who began to track the protests that are happening around the country, and he's learning that protests are happening all over the world, really, and it's happening in parts of the world that you wouldn't expect would have a protest regarding Black Lives Matter, which is astonishing, right?
Okay, so then Dennis, this is who you introduced us to Alex Smith, who was using this with GIS, right? 4,071 cities with protests across the United States since the 25th. Now, it doesn't say May 25th. It doesn't say that they're all George Floyd related, but they are all social justice, Black Lives Matter.
Correct. Because there's even some images, and I think he used mostly data from Twitter. So sometimes there's photos of the protesters. They have their placards, you know, Black Lives Matter or whatever. But it's amazing. There's in different parts of Asia, there are protests going on.
Let me ask Tauya then too. Tauya, beyond personal impact for you, and then Dennis, I'll call up the map of the world. Tauya, you're talking about. So Dennis talked about how it went beyond personal impact for him. How about you?
Yeah. So for me, it always starts with the students, right? In my mind, you know, I feel as though I'm a model for students, and that's in every area. So when we met with the students and they were interested in this, but I saw them literally scared to be the first to launch this, I knew that somebody had to have strength and fortitude to move forward. And so Dennis and I were not scared all the way. We had a couple of bumps in the road, but it really took a community for us to say we have strength enough to reach out and do this. Because Julia, what I don't think people understand is not everyone receives this well, okay? So whereas we just saw that huge map of all of that love and protest and rally, not everyone receives it well. In fact, just a couple of days ago, we saw in the news where protesters were met with a pistol and an automatic weapon.
Yes. Right.
So if you think in terms of that, then you're always trying to determine how this impacts first you and then others, because you're placing people in danger in a certain sense. So we did that. That impacted our students. For me personally, our justice studies students, 60 to 70% of my students are engaged in this type of work. They want to do law enforcement. So I'm consistently saying, I don't want to see you on the front page. I don't want to see you as a feature story. And this is how you should do it so that you're able to. I have to say, this country wants our law enforcement agents to enforce the law, but they're not teaching the law to them. So constitutional law should be mandatory. How do you expect someone to do a job that you have not given them the tools to do? We would not expect a lawyer to practice law if they never understood or took had taken classes in law. We would never expect a doctor to practice medicine without taking classes in those areas, but we expect this of law enforcement agents. And so I think that from that perspective, we're starting small, right? And then it moves outward. So we did that, and our faculty were all in. We received nothing but love and support from them. Our administrators, our president was there. I mean, it was beyond, I think, our wildest dreams. But then we started to see the trickle and the trickle down effect. We saw our student trustee leader join in with Black Student Association. We saw Asian Association. We saw all of our school groups, our student groups, student-led student groups stand up for racial and social justice. And that, to me, is more than anything I could have ever imagined. And so when you show the map of all of these countries, for me, having our students be impacted and they impact others, and they start these critical conversations, they now have a series of critical conversations. They're doing one on whiteness and white privilege. It's just opened the door where they feel comfortable to have these discussions, and what really is an academic environment where we should have these discussions.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm happy to hear you say that for sure. That's should be one of the safest places to have them as well. So this visual sort of ties in the map that Dennis brought to us from Alex Smith, and this is from CBS News, NBC. And you can see that on every continent except Greenland, there were protests as well. And I appreciate your sort of outlining the local that spreads out to. And I think a lot of other countries too realize that, I mean, we know racism happens everywhere. I mean, I think George Floyd just sparked for everyone the fact that it was probably happening where they were, or they sort of felt like, oh my, I think I told you guys I was looking at some international cartoons about the George Floyd thing. And so even that was fascinating to me. We can look at those a little bit later if you guys want, but I want to just go back to some ideas of global impact. And I want to set the stage, or tell people that the demonstration, all right, that Dennis and Tauya organized was about allowing people to demonstrate respect, I would say resistance to this sort of action. And so we were very peacefully lined up on either sides of the street, holding banners and signs affirming our belief that George Floyd should still be breathing and that others who have died should still be breathing. And Tauya went and how many names did you announce, Tauya, of people who had died?
A total of 9. And if I could, Julia, I just want to highlight for the COD community, this is very familiar. It kind of hits home for us because Sandra Bland was a member of our community. And I remember clearly when Sandra Bland was found hanging in her jail cell. But what I didn't really understand was that it was done in Houston. That happened in Houston a couple years before any of this ever occurred. And you could clearly see she had no interest in dying. She was pulled over on her campus for not using her right turn signal and later found dead in her cell from, I'm sure, a lynching. But for that to occur in a city like Houston, right? And then for that to happen again with George Floyd, and he's from Houston, it just sort of speaks to there is a broader issue here. But I wanted our community to know that we have a stake in this and that Sandra Bland should still be breathing.
Yeah.
Dennis and Tauya, are there other thoughts that you want to express to people on this topic, or these? There's so many topics, and you guys have kept it really well focused, because I think we could have gone off in so many directions, because it does tie into so many. Any things you want to add that I have neglected to ask you, or anything you want to put in perspective or add to?
Well, I think for me, there's a theme of, and this is part of my practice, the theme of common humanity, which I think goes very well with global education. that we are not so different from one another, that we are interconnected, and that we often don't realize that. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for us with the George Floyd event and other incidents, where we can finally begin to see what's really going on in our society, not just interpersonally. I think we can go deep and look at how is the society functioning, and how does it create this division, this disconnect from one another based on what we perceive as differences, that there really are no differences, that we are all the same. It's an opportunity, I think, to acknowledge that, and that we should all care about what happens to people like George Floyd, Sandra
Land.
Sorry, and many others.
We have the COD football player who recently
Correct.
met with death in a very unfortunate way, beyond unfortunate. So,
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, I think I would say Dennis talked about the sameness, and I agree. We are all human, but I think it's now time for us to see our differences and to celebrate them. There's nothing wrong with being different. The problem is when we don't respect one another's differences culturally, even as far as music and hair and any aspect that you can think of. It's important for us to celebrate one another's differences and to use that as a springboard for conversation. This is the moment and the time where you can connect and speak to people who no longer look like you. Everybody is not welcome to that, but I guarantee you, if you step out of your comfort zone, the places that you receive your news, the places that you typically go for whatever your entertainment, step out of your comfort zone and learn something about the humanity of the next person. I think that would help us understand and somehow respect one another in a different way. And I've had colleagues who I've never spoken to before in my life reach out to me and ask me what I think about things. I had a colleague send me a note about something that they wanted to do. They are a first responder, and they were scared about actually reporting certain things. And so they sent me a protocol that they wanted me to review. I mean, we just have to stretch out of our comfort zones at this point. This is not a moment, it's a movement. And either we get on the movement and we help catapult it forward, or we are being stagnant and really a part of the problem. So either you're a part of the solution or you're part of the problem. And I think it doesn't matter how much or how little. Julia, you talked about 5 minutes or 10 hours. Anything any of us do to catapult it forward makes a difference. That's what I would say. So vote, vote, vote. Next, I would say run. If this is your time and you feel like you can actually provide something, I'm not, brave enough to do that, but run for an election and you can do some things and change some ways. Don't feel crippled by fear, is what I would say.
And I would say you can start small with some boards in your community or even the school board, because school boards make big decisions. You don't have to be you don't have to be running for vice president or president. You can run locally, which makes a difference. Yeah. I want to say our student's name is Jamal Williams, by the way, and I'm sorry I blanked on that right now, but I do want to mention Jamal by name, Jamal Williams, who was recently killed in the hospital.
Can I add one other thing?
Sure, Dennis.
So I would add that this is also a wonderful opportunity to really try to understand what systemic racism really means.
Okay.
Because a lot of people don't understand what that means. I think we understand racism in terms of how I treat other people that are different from me. But it goes beyond that. It really goes into looking at how our society, how the system that we are under, how it is how it is a racist system, and really trying to understand how is it a racist system. So questioning policies, laws that discriminate and that create all these
inequities.
All these inequities. Thank you very much. Because I don't think we really we delve into that too much. And I think it's an opportunity for us to really begin to understand what that really means.
There's a lot out there, and the guy who created Veggie Tales did this great cartoony thing on talking about starting with slavery and then talking about how the VA bill, the Veterans Bill, was not only 2 Black people ever got to use it, talking about how loans to housing, right? And then you set up neighborhoods and you don't put food in them. And so, I mean, yes, that's systemic racism too, and how it's reinforced. And I think another discussion we have to talk about is privilege. I know people say, I work really hard, I'm not privileged, and I'm white. And I think that's, to be clear, we're not saying that you haven't had a hard life, right? We're saying that the color of your skin hasn't made your life harder, financially, judicially, educationally, etc. So, and I know you, yeah, go ahead, Tauya.
It's just a predisposition to hard. I mean, it's almost like when you enter into a store or enter into a race. That's a better analogy. When you enter into a race and you already have something that's a challenge that the next person in the race doesn't have. So you have 500 more pounds on your back just by having the color of your skin. That's the real privilege. This has nothing to do with how much you received, because I just had this conversation with a colleague that in fact they had a really poor, impoverished life, and they said, I was treated like that by the cops. And I said, unfortunately, people who are Black, whether they have money or not, are treated like that. Right. The richest man in the world was pulled over and put on a hood and handcuffed. So this isn't about money. It's about something totally different. And we've just narrowed it down to the variable of race and the color of your skin. And systemic racism, Dennis, touches everything, every organization, every institution. There isn't anything that it does not touch. And so, yeah, Julia, that's a larger conversation.
Yeah, right, it is. But then again, you said these are the conversations that our students are holding on campus, right?
Yes, so even tomorrow, they are holding a critical conversation, tomorrow being July 1st, which is a Wednesday, and they're holding Wednesday conversations. But I'm so proud of them because they are student-led, they are student-developed. They choose who they want on the panel, and the panelists who are experts or faculty are only there in case there's some snag. But the students are carrying the conversation, and you're hearing their hearts, and they're allowing other students to really become engaged. So we're hearing a very realistic approach to this topic by our students. And I think that's what we want them to do. We want them to be able to engage.
Yeah. That's right. Okay. Well, thank you both. I think, one of our goals is the conversations evolve, is to have people who wish to come back. And so I think these conversations will continue to evolve, and hopefully for the better.
Yeah.
Not that this conversation was bad, you know what I mean, around the topic. So thank you guys very much. And I guess we will end on that note.